It's been half a year since my last Cyberpunk video, and about 4 or 5 months since I picked up and played Cyberpunk. I've opted not to check out many of the patches pre 1.5 because, to be honest, there was just no real concrete reason to revisit Night City, despite thoroughly enjoying most of my time with it back in late 2020. Combine this with the depressing overall sentiment of the game at the time, and I took a step back to wait and watch and see what CDPR could be able to pull off as a more passive observer. I was convinced the only reason I would return to the game and create content would be expansions, but patch 1.5 had intrigued me to the point where I couldn't not check it out. Over the last 4 or 5 days, I've been playing this souped up next-gen ready version of 2077, and even as a player who experienced minimal bugs and glitches on my PC playthroughs on pre and post-release, I'm thrilled to say that Cyberpunk is starting to take some more sizable strides to becoming a more living and breathing world, with some additions to make it a more complete experience. So here are my thoughts on the latest developments, the future of Cyberpunk, and how Neon Nation fits into that future. RPGs are all about the small details, because when you're building an immersive RPG experience in a megacity of the future, the small details are everything. If you watched my 100-hour review of the game post-launch, you'd remember that I compared Night City to an impressive painting. Really fun to look at, but not as interactive as I would have hoped. I'm happy to say that with 1.5, this is becoming less and less true, due to the fact that CDPR has been taking the time to add not only the large standout features players have been wanting, but also these small details. By far, one of my favorite updates is the ability to purchase apartments. Having other districts as your hub makes roleplaying much less Watson-centric, and also helps showcase your progression throughout the game beyond becoming a deadlier mercenary or simply collecting a bunch of cars. After all, the whole point of doing the dirty things that you do in this world is to rake in those sweet eddies, hoping that it can give you a better life. Apartments are important in this ascent to the top of the mercenary throne. I will say I would have liked to see you start off in that cramped apartment in the Northside Industrial District first, because I do think the first Watson apartment you're given through Cyberpunk's narrative is actually pretty nice. It would help tell the rags to riches story a bit better if you were stuck with the cramped, dingy apartment away from the hustle and bustle and had to work your way up to the Watson apartment, and then maybe the Glen or the corporate one. But regardless, I think this is really just what the players were asking for. More places to chill out in, drink tea, play the guitar, and live out all aspects of a life in Night City. CDPR has really listened and tried their best to implement the most requested features in a way that makes sense, even when it comes to augmenting your character's appearance after you start your playthrough. Now, although it's not done through walking to the barbershop or a Ripperdoc clinic, and instead simply by interacting with mirrors in your apartments, CDPR has added something that is almost a non-negotiable in the world of style over substance, but without having to completely revamp the mechanics behind it. It's stuff that should have made its way into the base game that we're all happy to see now. Arguably the weakest element of Cyberpunk 2077 was its open world reactivity. In patch 1.5, even simple actions like the sounds of your clothes brushing against NPCs, and how the game conveys the sense of squeezing through these crowds as your player model tilts and leans is a really nice touch. Again, the small details really matter when it comes to immersion. Shooting into a crowd will draw a more realistic response, and have these crowds fleeing in a variety of directions, versus simply having the masses crouch down with their hands in the air, rigid and unable to do anything other than be stationary targets. Some NPCs will also draw their weapons in a last-ditch attempt. Something that makes sense within the context. Shooting when you're on the streets causes drivers to panic, many times backing up and taking the expedited route of curbs and sidewalks. If there's too much panic, they can crash, many times knocking out the drivers and passengers, or just outright killing them. Balance changes are also a much needed and fantastic change, both in terms of economy and combat. When it comes to eddies, in prior patches, I always felt like I was just flat out broke, never being able to afford many of the vehicles and cyberware options that I would have liked, especially during the endgame. Things have gotten cheaper, and now I never feel like I'm going to be locked out of certain options for too long, and it's more about what path I want to take to get to these options. In combat, the game does feel like it's bumped up the difficulty. This mostly comes about through how enemies approach combat. Many use their abilities much more often, while also leaning back into the types of combat that are most appropriate for them based on their gang or faction affiliations. Where regular police are more hesitant and cautious, maelstromers are going to be coming at you clubs, hammers, and knives swinging. Hiding from police encounters is now viable, and they're actually quite good at tracking you down if you aren't tucked away in a hidden location. It'll also take longer for the coast to clear before you can re-enter the main arteries and veins of Night City's streets again. A revamp to some of the skills and trees also means that playstyles like the throwing knife assassin option is now much more viable and has quickly become one of my favorite ways to play. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details because, to be honest, the patch notes are there and you should really just be playing Cyberpunk 2077 to form your own opinion. But here are my final thoughts. Cyberpunk 2077 got way too much unnecessary hate when it launched. It lacked in some major areas, but it was still a masterpiece in terms of music, narrative, and visual and character design. Now Cyberpunk is even better and is starting to bridge the gap between how good these things are with how weak the open world was. I think these are some major steps into getting the open world of Cyberpunk within striking distance of what makes the rest of Cyberpunk amongst the best in gaming. I'd love to see open world activities, more cyberware options, further improvements to open world encounters, and more work on the AI interactions within the world to make Night City feel even more alive. But as it stands right now, I'm very pleased with what I've seen coming back. I mean, they even changed things that they didn't need to change, like the Nomad intro, to make more sense. It looks like there's just been a top-down audit of the game as a whole, and they simply haven't settled on just doing the important things. So where does the channel go from here? Well, I'm back to covering Cyberpunk. There's just too much to look forward to in the future with the Edgerunners anime, the potential multiplayer, and expansions, that I'm ready to jump back into it and start covering the game, the lore, the characters, and the conspiracies. With that being said, I will continue with the World of Cyberpunk videos in tandem with my coverage of the game, which will showcase dystopian stories from our real world that are proof that we are already living in the dark future. If you guys have not watched the entire 2077 lore explained video or my 100-hour review, I suggest you guys go check that out. And as always, if you enjoyed the content, join Neon Nation by subscribing to the Neon Arcade.